Downloading, installing, and using WampServer. If you want to get into web design, it's a good idea to have a test server available that you can use to test out your ideas or experiment with different content management systems without your work being publicly available for the world to see. If you're using a PC, then WampServer is a free solution that I recommend using as your test server. If you're using a Mac, then XAMPP will be a good solution for you. XAMPP is also available for PCs. However, this tutorial will only cover how to get started with WampServer. Be aware that XAMPP and WampServer have some functionality that is similar. For instance, they both use phpMyAdmin for managing databases. What is a WAMP server? WAMP means Windows, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Windows is the operating system. Oftentimes with the server you will use Linux as your operating system, but Windows is perfectly fine for a test server. Apache is the web server itself. It uses HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. MySQL is a database. MariaDB is another type of database that you can use as an alternative to MySQL. WampServer gives you the option of installing either or. PHP is a scripting language that you use on the web in conjunction with HTML and CSS. PHP can be used to make web pages more dynamic, and the code is executed on the server itself. Now let's go ahead and get started with downloading a WAMP server. Ordinarily, the first thing we would want to do is go to WampServer.com and download the platform. Unfortunately, the website has been down for quite some time now, but we can download WampServer from another website. I recommend using SourceForge.net. That is a fairly reputable website that you can go to for free open source software. Now let's go to SourceForge and do a search for WampServer. Let's click download once we reach the WampServer page. It's going to take a few moments for WampServer to download, but once the window opens asking you to save it, click Save File. The next step is to go to our Downloads folder and look for the WampServer icon. Let's double-click it to initiate the installation process. Installing WampServer. Windows will ask me if I want to make changes to my device. Click Yes. I will be using English as my default language. I recommend reading through the license agreement and then clicking I accept the agreement. Then click Next. This next screen will give you information that you should follow in order to make sure that WampServer will install correctly. For instance, WampServer recommends that you turn off Skype before trying to install the server. Let's go ahead and click Next. Now, I already have WampServer installed on my computer, so for the purposes of demonstrating the installation process, I'm going to rename my directory from WampServer64 to WampServer64B. Now let's click Next. On this page I need to select the components that I want to include in my installation. WampServer is automatically going to have Apache and some of the newer versions of PHP installed, so I'm satisfied with that. MariaDB will be installed by default. You have the option of installing MySQL as well. That way you can choose between MariaDB and MySQL as your database. I recommend going ahead and installing MySQL, and let's go with MySQL 8 instead of MySQL 5. Now, more often than not, I'm going to use MariaDB as my database, but there may be a content management system out there that wants me to use MySQL instead of MariaDB, so I'll give myself the option. And of course, phpMyAdmin, phpSysInfo, and some other applications are going to be installed. Let's click Next. Now, since I already have WampServer installed on my computer, I'm going to click Cancel, but you will want to click Install. Troubleshooting the installation process. If WampServer will not install correctly on your computer, you may need to download and install Microsoft Visuall C Redistributable for Visual Studio. First, go to support.microsoft.com. Do a search for Microsoft Visuall C++. In the results list, you should see a link that says the latest supported version of Microsoft Visual C++. Click that link and download Visual Studio. You have multiple versions of Visual Studio to choose from. I recommend just downloading the very first one at the top of the list, and then trying to install WampServer again. If it doesn't work, you may need to go ahead and download just about every library that's on this page. Now, as for whether or not you need to use the x86 or x64 version, or the ARM64 version, that depends on your computer. Most people have a 64-bit operating system, so they would download the x64 version. If you have a 32-bit operating system, you will need to download the x86 version. The x86 version can work on both 32 and 64-bit machines, so it really wouldn't matter if you only just decide to download that version. In order to determine what kind of operating system and processor your computer has, go to your computer's control panel. Click the heading or the icon for System. You should see the type of processor where it says System Type. As you can see from my computer, I have a 64-bit operating system. Now I'm going to leave you to download Microsoft Visual Studio on your own. Just download it, go to your Downloads folder, double-click the icon to execute the installation, and then just follow the steps. If you want to see if you have any versions of Visual Studio already installed, go to your control panel and click Uninstall a Program. Scroll down the page and look for Microsoft Visual C++, and then 2005, 2008, 2010, or any other year. If you already have some versions of Visual Studio installed, then skip over those installations and just go back to the page on Microsoft Support's website and download the versions that you do not have. Turning on WampServer. Now that we have WampServer installed on our computer, let's make sure it's up and running. You can check by looking in the bottom right-hand corner of your computer at your taskbar. If you see a WampServer icon, that means it's on. If you do not see the icon, then look for the WampServer icon on your desktop and double-click it to turn it on. You might have to go through your Start menu and look for WampServer 64, and then just click that to turn it on. Editing the phpIni file. The first thing we want to do now that we have WampServer on and running is we want to go ahead and make an edit to the phpIni file. So, go back to your taskbar in the bottom right-hand corner of your computer. Look for the WampServer icon. Click it. Hover your mouse over PHP and then choose phpIni in the submenu that appears. I have Dreamweaver installed on my computer, so the file will open up with that software. If you do not have Dreamweaver or some other code editor installed on your computer, then you can just open the file with Notepad or WordPad. Now that I have the phpIni file open, I want to do a search for file size. You will find the maximum file size under a section called File Uploads. I want to increase that to maybe 50 megabytes. I believe 5 megabytes might be your default, which is going to be really small if you want to try and upload pictures or a video or some other media onto your website. You can always go back and change your phpIni file later if you want to. So let's go ahead and save this, and then I'll close out Dreamweaver. Or you can close out Notepad or WordPad or whatever you are using. After you make changes to your phpIni file, I recommend going ahead and restarting your server, just to make sure that all of the changes you made are being read by the server. So go back to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, click the WampServer icon in your taskbar, and then click Restart All Services. This will take a few moments for your server to shut down and then turn back on. Always be sure to save any changes that you're making to any website that you're working on before restarting your server. Accessing phpMyAdmin. phpMyAdmin is the administration platform for MySQL and MariaDB. In other words, it's where you want to go to create databases for your websites. To get to phpMyAdmin, click the WampServer icon in the taskbar in the bottom right-hand corner of your computer. and then choose phpMyAdmin. Or you can just open up your browser and type in localhost/phpMyAdmin. At the MyAdmin page, use root for your username. Leave the password field blank. If you're asked about your choice of server, I recommend using MariaDB for everything. Select that from the drop-down menu and click Go. Creating a database. A database essentially just stores all of the information from your website and your other projects. For instance, you might have users register to use your website, and that information will be stored on the database. So look in the far left-hand column and click New to create a new database. You'll want to give your database a name and then choose a collation. For the name of the database, I recommend maybe just using the name of your website to help you keep track of it. For the collation, I usually use UTF-8 General CI. A collation is basically just a rule set for how data is sorted on your database. More often than not, UTF-8 is what you'll want to use, but some content management systems might specify that you need to use UTF-32 or UTF-8 MB4 or something else. So be sure to read the README files for any software or any content management systems that you download before you install it. Click the Create button and your database has been created. Now, your database won't have any content yet because you haven't started installing software onto your computer. You could also just manually code tables with SQL, but that's something that we're not going to cover in this lesson. The next steps. Now that we have WampServer up and running, the next step is to start creating a website. We can do this by experimenting with different content management systems like WordPress and Drupal, or we can build a website completely from scratch if we know how to code. We can use some assistance from a code editor and a web development tool like Dreamweaver. Ultimately, you can choose between WordPress, Drupal, and Dreamweaver tutorials that I have available by reading the synopsis for each course and choosing the one that sparks your interest. WordPress is a safe bet for anyone that's just getting started into web design. It has a multitude of user-generated themes and plugins to help you customize the look and feel of your website, and you can put in a lot less effort and get a lot out of it. Drupal is a powerful content management system, but it is meant more for web developers who have a background in coding. If you want to get more information about WordPress, Drupal, and another content management system called Joomla, here is an article that gives you a really good comparison between the three. Now, before you go, let's go ahead and review the major steps of this tutorial. First, you will need to go to WampServer.com to download the server software. Second, you will need to install WampServer, making sure that you have Microsoft Visuall C Redistributable installed. Third, you will need to launch WampServer and use the PHP.ini file for increasing the file upload size constraints. Fourth, you will need to use phpMyAdmin to create your databases. Finally, you will need to use http://localhost to access your websites. Thank you for watching this tutorial.